Hi, Pastor Anthony Decker with your hashtag Better Together devotion for today. And I mentioned yesterday that Paul wrote much of the New Testament. And so let's talk about some of the things that Paul wrote. One of the things that Paul wrote was letters. They were written to someone else. In many ways, we're reading someone else's mail. Oh my. And the reality is that we're reading only half the story. We only have Paul's letters. We don't have the letters that the church at Corinth or the church at Galatia or wherever that is, the church at Laodicea. We don't have the letters that they wrote to Paul. We only have the response, the replies that Paul wrote. And some of those letters got kind of passed through lots of hands and maybe even got combined, and there's all sorts of things that happened to them. Well, one of the letters that Paul wrote was to the community of Galatia. What's weird about this is Galatia isn't a town like the other letters. Galatia's this whole, it'd be like if I wrote a letter, to the state of Virginia. I'm not writing it to any one city. I'm writing it to the entire state, the whole region. Galatia is a region. And in that understanding of that, Paul writes to a group of people who apparently have taken the scriptures, taken the way that we read the text, and done what I did when I was younger, what many of us do when we're immature in our faith. That is, looking at the word and the scriptures as rules and regulations rather than as a story of freedom and understanding that grace is abounding. So the people at Galatia had read about the Jewish custom of circumcision and the Jewish understanding of kosher laws, and they began teaching one another that you had to do these things if you were truly going to be Christian. They were kind of like sitting back going, well, those other folks, they're weak. They don't understand what we understand. We're the strong ones. We have the true faith. We're the true Christians. We're really abiding by Jesus. And they said that if you want to be closer to God, you have to do these things. You have to get circumcised. Adults had to get circumcised? Yes, that's what Galatia said. You had to abide by the kosher laws. It meant you had to make sure you were eating meat that hadn't been sacrificed to idols. It meant you had to be eating meat that had been bludgeoned blood out of it. You couldn't mix milk and meat together. No such thing as a cheeseburger. And bacon, don't get me started on bacon. You can't eat bacon. You see, there were these rules. And all of us have the ability to apply a rule to ourselves. In fact, I encourage people, especially during the season of Lent, to create a rule of life that applies to you and helps you get closer to God. There is nothing wrong with it. In fact, it's a great thing when we apply a rule to ourself. Notice I'm stressing this ourself business. It's not cool when we take that same rule and make it a box that God has to be in and apply that box that God has to be in to other people's faith journeys. It's not cool when we take that rule and make it a stipulation for salvation and grace to abound. Paul writes to the Galatians, and he says that. He says that, y'all, you're taking it too far. You're just not understanding this grace. Saving grace is what this is in the scriptures. It's about seeing grace in the scriptures. It's not about looking for laws. Too many of us go in search of looking for the rule book. When God says, I love you, I want you to create your own rule of life that helps you get closer to me. We'll do it together. We'll co-write this thing. That's what God does through sanctifying grace. When we find grace through the reading of scriptures, the meditation and the silence and the contemplation, in the fasting, in the mission work with our hands, in the reading of the words in red, in the singing of songs together, there are so many different ways that we encounter God. Why should we limit one person's understanding of God and one person's experience of God as the only way we get to do so? Paul writes to the Galatians telling them to stop looking for rules within the scriptures and to start seeing grace and to start seeing that God is a God who takes and erases the boundaries among us and accepts us where we are as different and beautiful as created. In fact, there's this famous place in the Galatians where he says there's neither Jew nor Greek, male nor female, slave nor free. This concept of living within grace and living within the liberty and beauty of God's love is one that Paul writes to a community of folks who were in search of a rule to apply not just to their own self, but to others. Apply rules of life and faith to you. Go ahead and take some time and think about what you want your life to be disciplined and do that. Set expectations on your faith. Expectations as disciples are something we have to have. But don't push those on other people. Instead, allow God's grace to do that work. Allow God's grace to be the active spirit work, that counselor, that comforter, that wonderful spirit that inspired the words will also inspire new ways of connecting with God. It's what we do when we're better together. Amen.